When you have a sport with 353 teams, it is hard to definitively comment on coaching trends and schemes. But to start the season, it sure felt like everyone is icing ball screens. A possible explanation for that is the success of Texas Tech's defense last year, but more on them later on. In this video, we'll look at the pros and cons of ice defense, why teams are using it, and what offenses do against it. To ice a ball screen means to send it to the baseline. Here you'll see DeMonte Williams change his foot angles to get on the high side of the ball handler. Once the guard forces it that way, the big can position himself accordingly. But how far up or down the big actually comes to the ball handler depends on the team and the skill sets of the offensive players involved. Communication is important in ice. The big is the one who can see the screen unfolding, so he needs to yell it out so the guard knows to change his foot angles. Once that happens, the guard will oftentimes signal by pointing to where he's going to send the handler. That point is to the spot where the big needs to go. Vernon Carey's goal as the big here is to provide support on the ball while not letting Azubuike behind him on the roll. By Texas Tech being so drastically in ice, Bethune-Cookman just loses all interest in ever really trying to ball screen. So why are so many teams icing? Traditional ball screen coverages like the hard hedge are much more aggressive than ice. The big gets parallel with the sideline and forces the ball handler towards half court. But the problem is that can potentially create a 4-on-3 opportunity. While the hedge is occurring, a Mississippi State defender must tag or help on the roll. With ice, tag responsibilities are much less severe. The other advantage to ice is keeping the ball on one side of the floor. Here Texas Southern isn't in hard hedge or ice, and the ball gets into the middle. It's harder for the defense to commit to help when the ball is in the middle of the floor. The passer can easily see all of his options, and the length of the shorter pass gives defenders less time to recover. Compare that pass to this one against ice. The defender does give some help on the roll, but he has time to recover on the flight of the longer pass. That's not to say ice is perfect. Defenses still have a tendency to tag or help on the roll, sometimes when they don't even really need to, and that can lead to allowing 3-point shots just like the hedge. But that being said, icing should theoretically reduce the probability of giving up these shots compared to hedging or blitzing. But coverages don't just work in theory, they have to be executed. Here, even though Kansas is trying to ice, Dotson isn't able to keep the handler out of the middle. The ice scheme isn't designed to handle these middle drives, and that is the biggest risk in icing. The coverage is great in theory, but it can be difficult to execute. Savvy ball handlers will start driving towards the baseline only to snake the ball back into the middle. The big involved in the screen can be prone to a blown coverage too. When your man runs up to set a screen, it feels natural to stick right with him. But in ice, that big needs to get towards the sideline. Even when the big is in the right spot, now he has to be able to keep the ball handler in front. Coaches will often counter the ice by directing the screener to pop, and this can become a constant game of cat and mouse between the offense and the defense. It's very hard for the big involved in the screen to also defend the pop, so a defense has some choices to make. If you stunt with the nearest defender, it gives the big a slightly better chance of recovery. If you help with the nearest defender, the big then rotates all the way to the weak side, or that nearest defender can just stay at home completely. Some defenses will mostly just live with a late contest on that pop 3, partly because there are a lot of college 5-men who simply won't take that shot. Here James Dickey is a non-shooter for UNC Greensboro, so Azubuike can stay extra long in his ice coverage. Instead of popping to the 3-point line, another thing the big can do is short roll into space. This is where a guy like Draymond Green has hurt NBA defenses with his decision making. But again, college 5-men don't tend to be the best playmakers, and that's part of what makes ice effective. One aspect we haven't mentioned yet is that certain actions are easier to ice than others. This is called a rush-out ball screen, with McCormick starting out on the block. Carey can see the screen coming the entire way and direct his teammates into ice. Compare that to this throw-and-chase ball screen. DeSouza is already on the perimeter, so it's much harder for O'Connell to get to the high side and White to get towards the sideline. Any type of movement, screening, or randomness that can distract the defense from just narrowing in on the ball screen itself can be a win for the offense. Opponents will use dribble handoffs and rescreens to fight their way into the middle of the court against ice. When a player is able to use the screen and get into the middle, that's when the emergency switch comes into play. The big will cover for the guard as a last resort by just permanently switching onto the ball handler. A lot of coaches don't like to do this unless it's an emergency. Texas Tech is actually doing things a little differently than the rest of the country. Giving up the middle is a non-negotiable in their system, and that's at all times, not just during a ball screen. They don't even need to adjust their foot angles when a ball screen is coming because they were already forcing baseline to begin with. This doesn't come without some risk. The more aggressive you push to the sideline, the harder it is to actually stay in front of your man. So Texas Tech does what's almost the opposite of the emergency switch. They still force you to the baseline at all costs, but then they just switch from there. It simplifies the job of the on-ball defender, and it helps take away the pop. It's gotten to the point where it's almost an automatic in their system, and it allows them to minimize the number of blown coverages that ice defenses can typically be accustomed to. For more college basketball analysis all season long, subscribe to our Hoop Vision Plus newsletter.